Alright, so you guys probably know that David Ackman has done an interview with Sam Harris. Now, Sam Harris, his popularity has sort of been waning a lot, really, really heavily. Now, I don't know if he was always this boring sounding, but man, is it hard to listen to this guy. It's almost like he's doing ASMR. Like, it's to that level where it's like this really slow, very whispery, the S's like have that little whistle to them, which are annoying as fuck. But he actually argued that Donald Trump telling the squad to go back where they came from is not racist, which is pretty insane. Let's hear this out.
My last podcast when I was taking the allegations of white supremacy off of me. Um, I mean, to some degree, they had come because I hadn't jumped on the bandwagon in calling Trump a racist for specific things like telling Ilhan Omar and the rest of the squad to go back to where they came from, right? That didn't seem like a clean example of racism to me. And I've always said that I think Trump is a racist, and I see examples of racism, in his bio. Um, but even someone who is a racist, you can't hold them accountable for everything that can possibly be spun as evidence of racism when it's bad evidence of racism. Because if that evidence is going to stand for Trump, it will then stand for other people, right? So, we're all going to be hoisted by that same news because it has to be universalizable. So if telling someone to go back to where they came from is a sure sign of racism, well, you have to be able to map it on to other contexts. And here was a context where I thought, okay, Trump is such an imbecile. He might not know that the other three members of the squad aren't also immigrants, right? Ilhan Omar came from Somalia, right? So that she fit the type he was targeting. Maybe he was just talking about her. Maybe he thought that all of these women have funny names. They're probably all immigrants. Maybe he didn't. I don't give him the credit to have thought about it for more than for even 2 seconds before his thumb started moving on his smartphone, right?
In a sense,
So,
though, that could be argued to be kind of like an aggravated. I mean, we don't need to go over that particular case too much, but
right.
you could make the case that
Alright, so basically here he makes the claim that, it's sloppy evidence that Donald Trump is a racist. Now, I'm glad that Sam Harris at least agrees that that Donald Trump is indeed a racist, because he is 100% a racist. There are many examples of that. One of them being that I forget if it was his dad who owned the apartment complex or if it was he himself, but basically back in the 60s or 70s, they straight up refused to give housing to black people. So if a black person came in, they would say, oh, we're filled up and all this. They had like this little plan, and then Trump went in court to defend it. Also with the Central Park Five, they were exonerated due to literal DNA evidence, is my understanding of the situation. He had previously called for the death penalty against them, and then he still stands by it, even though they're exonerated by DNA evidence. And then obviously more examples of that are this one, for example. So there are literally countless examples of Donald Trump being a racist as fuck, obviously, and this is one of them. Telling them, like, him not knowing that three of them are not immigrants from other countries is not an excuse for him not being racist. First of all, because obviously it fits the bill for Ilhan Omar because she's an immigrant from Somalia. But that is sort of entirely irrelevant. In fact, it just kind of plays into it. Like, he's an imbecile. He's a real dumbass. So he doesn't know that three of them are not immigrants. But that doesn't mean that he's not being racist. In fact, that would just kind of play more into the racism. And you know that a lot of racist people tend to be really fucking stupid. And so when he says some shit like that, obviously it's like, you're talking about, what is it? Rashida Tlaib, who I believe is Palestinian, I believe she is. AOC is, Puerto Rican by ethnicity, and then Ilhan is Somalian. And it's just like that. So that's kind of the situation there. And then he also goes on to bring up an example of like, oh, if Trump were to say to an Irish person, it wouldn't be racist or something like that, which is just a really weird thing, because that has nothing to do with the situation. What you have to do is you have to look at the statement made, you have to look at who it's by and sort of the history, and then you have to see, okay, is this a racist comment based on those things? Because we know of Donald Trump's past and history with racism, we know that his remark was racist. And by the way, I also want to mention that there's a lot of like hatred of white people from other white people. So, for example, Hitler hated the Slavs. He actually thought that they were an inferior race. That's why he led a war of extermination into the USSR. There were like 5+ million POWs. 3 million of them died in Nazi custody. That was a war of extermination. Okay, and in Mein Kampf, he talked about that. In the United States, when Irish immigrants came as a result of different famines, I don't know if it was the potato famine or if it was other famines. I believe it was the potato famine. The Americans who were here were pieces of shit to them, as they were to every other, group of people that came, whether it be, Chinese people who they ended up banning from the country, from entering the country, or whoever it may be, right? They didn't even view Irish people as, like, they didn't like them either. So to act as if there's even not, like, any sort of a racism within that is pretty hilarious, because it's like, what would you call, like, Hitler's hatred of the Slavs? It's literally racism. But, I guess Slavs weren't, I guess technically they weren't considered white, but, I don't know. I would consider them white, but I guess they're not considered white by people like Hitler himself, so. But either way, it's irrelevant in this situation, because we know based on Trump's history of him being a racist, that this statement is actually racist, because he's saying, oh, why don't you guys, you brownies, go back to your shithole countries, where the rest of you brown people, low IQ, darkies go back to your... But that's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. And to think that that's not racist is completely rebarded. I don't know how else to tell you that. This is a really fucking stupid claim by Sam Harris. And I don't know why he's clinging to it.